18 years after divorcing his wife, not knowing she was pregnant, a millionaire gets a late-night call from her. Her voice is shaking as she tells him the truth. He has twins, and now those kids are in danger. Without thinking twice, he grabs his keys, leaves everything behind, and runs. A greatest ever story for my beautiful family. Let's start with love. Peter Clark had built his fortune on calculated risks, but the gamble he took on doubt instead of trust would cost him everything worth living for. The morning began like any other morning in their life together. Vivica Spencer moved through their bedroom with that particular grace that had first caught Peter's attention. Her dark skin glowing in the early light, filtering through silk curtains. She was humming something soft, some melody from her childhood that she never quite remembered the name of, while folding his shirts with careful precision. "You don't have to do that," Peter said from the bed, watching her with the kind of contentment that most men spend their entire lives searching for. "We have people for that." She turned, her smile radiant and teasing. "Your people fold like they're angry at fabric. I fold like I love you." That was Vivica. She had a way of turning mundane moments into poetry, of making a mansion feel like home instead of a monument. When Peter had met her at a community fundraiser, she'd been wearing a dress that probably cost less than his watch. Yet she'd been the most magnetic person in the room, not because of beauty alone, though she was stunning, but because of something deeper. She listened when people spoke. She laughed with her whole body. She saw through his wealth to the man underneath who was tired of being seen as a bank account with a pulse. Their marriage had scandalized his circle. His attorney had actually said the words prenuptial agreement 17 times in one conversation. His mother had suggested he was having some kind of crisis. But Peter had never been more certain of anything. Vivica wasn't interested in his money. She worked with women in crisis, helped them rebuild shattered lives, and came home with stories that reminded him the world was bigger than quarterly returns and property acquisitions. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching him staring. "That I'm the luckiest man breathing." "Flatterer." She came to the bed, kissed his forehead. "I have a community meeting this morning. Budget discussions for the new shelter program. Take the car." "Take the driver, please," she laughed. "Peter, I'm going 6 blocks. I'll walk like a normal human being." Normal. That word again. Vivica had a way of keeping him grounded, of reminding him that wealth was a tool, not an identity. She'd refused to quit her work when they married, despite his offers to fund any project she wanted. "I need to be useful," she'd explained. "Not comfortable, useful." He left for his office an hour later, kissing her goodbye at the door like he'd done 1,000 mornings before. He had no way of knowing it would be the last morning that simple gesture would ever feel innocent. The envelope arrived at noon. His assistant brought it in with his lunch, looking uncomfortable. This came by courier, marked confidential. Inside were photographs, not explicit but damning in their intimacy. Vivica, sitting in a coffee shop with a man Peter didn't recognize. The angle suggested they were holding hands across the table, though the image was grainy enough to be ambiguous. Another photo showed them walking together in a park, the man's hand seemingly on her lower back. A third caught them outside a hotel, mid-conversation, standing too close. Peter's hands trembled. The accompanying letter was typed anonymous. "Your wife isn't who you think she is. These meetings have been happening for months. Thought you deserved to know before you're made a complete fool." His chest constricted. He told himself there had to be an explanation. Vivica had never given him a single reason to doubt her. But the photos sat on his desk like accusations, and his mind began constructing narratives he didn't want to believe. He called his business partner, Lawrence, who came immediately. Lawrence looked at the photos and shook his head slowly. "Peter, I hate to say this, but I've seen this before. My brother went through the exact same thing. There could be an explanation. Of course there could be. But you need to ask yourself something." Lawrence leaned forward, his voice dropping. "A woman from her background, suddenly living in luxury, no prenup protecting you. What if this whole thing was strategic? What if she's been playing you from the start?" The poison worked slowly. Peter tried calling Vivica, but she didn't answer. She was in her meeting, phone silenced like always. But his mind, infected now with suspicion, interpreted her silence as evasion. More photos arrived the next day. Then a copy of a restaurant receipt with a handwritten note at the bottom that said, "Tonight was perfect." The handwriting looked similar to Vivica's, though Peter couldn't be certain. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He hired an investigator who came back with reports of regular meetings, always at discreet locations, always with the same man. The investigator couldn't confirm infidelity, but he couldn't rule it out either. When Peter finally confronted Vivica, he'd been awake for 40 hours, marinating in betrayal he'd convinced himself was real. Who is he? Peter's voice was cold, foreign even to himself. Vivica looked up from her book, confused. "Who is who?" "Udedasino, Stu Tais Tatisum, the man you've been meeting. Don't lie to me. I have photographs." The color drained from her face, but not from guilt, from shock. "What are you talking about?" He threw the envelope at her feet. She picked it up slowly, her hands shaking as she looked through the images. When she looked back up at him, there were tears in her eyes. "Peter, this is Malcolm. He's a social worker I've been collaborating with on the shelter project. These photos make it look like something it's not. Then why didn't you tell me about him?" "I did. I've mentioned Malcolm a dozen times. You never ask details because you're not interested in my work." You smile and nod and then go back to your phone. The accuracy of that observation should have stopped him, but pride, that ancient poison, was already coursing through his veins. "So it's my fault you're sneaking around?" "I'm not sneaking around. We have public meetings about public projects. Peter, look at me. You know me. You know I don't do anything anymore." His voice broke. "All I know is my wife has been meeting another man for months, keeping it quiet. And now there are photos of you two looking very comfortable together. Because we're friends, colleagues. That's what adults do. Peter, we work together without it meaning something sordid." But he couldn't hear her. The doubt had roots now, deep and thorny. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Peter had resources, connections, attorneys who could make things disappear or appear as needed. Vivica had her dignity and the truth, neither of which held much weight in legal warfare. She tried reasoning with him one last time, appearing at his office unannounced. "Peter, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes, without your attorneys or your pride in the room. I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen." Her voice cracked. "I love you. I have only ever loved you. I don't know who sent those photos or why they're trying to destroy us, but I swear on everything sacred that I have never been unfaithful." He looked at her, and for one brief moment he saw his wife. The woman who folded his shirts with love, who made their mansion a home, who laughed with her whole body. But then Lawrence's voice echoed in his head. Women from her background suddenly living in luxury. "I want you out by Friday," Peter said, his voice hollow. "Take your clothes. Everything else stays." "Peter, Friday." She left his office, and that should have been the end of it. But that night, as Peter sat alone in his house that suddenly felt cavernous, Vivica returned one final time. She stood in the doorway, small and devastated, wearing the same dress she'd worn the night he proposed. "I came to tell you something," she said quietly. "Not to change your mind, because clearly your mind is made of stone now, but because you deserve to know the truth about what you're throwing away. I don't want to hear, 'I'm done fighting. I'm done begging.' I'm leaving, Peter. I'm leaving you and your mansion and your suspicion and your pride. But I want you to know that years from now, when you finally discover you were wrong, when you finally learn there was never anyone else, you'll have to live with what you destroyed." She pulled off her wedding ring, set it on the marble floor between them, and walked away. Peter stood there, listening to her footsteps echo through the house. He heard the front door open. He heard it close. He stood frozen, watching through the window as she walked down the long driveway in bare feet, because she'd kicked off her heels. One hand pressed against her stomach in a gesture he didn't understand. Behind her, his mansion blazed with lights. Ahead of her, Only darkness. And in that moment, Peter Clark, who had built an empire on calculated risks, realized too late that the only gamble that truly mattered was the one he'd just catastrophically lost. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Vivica Spencer was walking away, carrying more than her broken heart. She was carrying two pieces of him that would grow into the only second chance he'd ever get. Chapter 2. The architecture of survival. The women's shelter smelled like industrial soap and resignation. Vivica Spencer sat on a narrow cot in a room shared with 5 other women, her small backpack containing everything she owned now: 3 changes of clothes, a water bottle, her expired social work certification documents, and the pregnancy test she'd taken in a gas station bathroom. 2 pink lines, 2 lives depending on her, 2 reasons she couldn't fall apart. First time? The woman on the next cot was older, with kind eyes and scars on her arms that told stories Vivica didn't need to hear. First time being homeless. Not my first time being broken. The woman nodded with understanding. Difference is, broken can heal. You'll see. Vivica's body had other plans. Morning sickness arrived with vengeance, making it impossible to hide her condition. The shelter. Coordinator, a steel-spined woman named Ruth, called her into the office. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. Vivica nodded. "Father in the picture?" "No." "Child support?" "No." Ruth studied her for a long moment. "You know you have options, resources. This doesn't have to be your path." "It's already my path," Vivica said quietly. "I'm keeping them." "Them?" "It feels like more than one. I don't know why. Just a feeling." Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Then you need to start planning. This place has a 2-month limit. After that, you're on your own." Vivica found work at a textile factory where questions weren't asked and paychecks were handed out in cash. The work was punishing. 12-hour shifts operating machinery that turned fabric into cheap clothing destined for discount stores. Her hands developed calluses. Her back ached constantly. Her body swelled with pregnancy while she stood at her station, drinking water when supervisors weren't looking, hiding her growing belly under oversized shirts. The other workers, mostly immigrant women with their own survival stories, watched over her with quiet solidarity. They snuck her extra food from their lunches. They covered for her when she had to vomit in the bathroom. They didn't ask questions because they understood that some stories were too painful to tell. At 6 months, the ultrasound technician at the free clinic looked up from the screen with surprise. "You're having twins." Vivica's breath caught. Twins. 2 sons. The technician showed her the screen, pointing out 2 distinct heartbeats, 2 separate forms curled together in the darkness of her womb. "Boys," the technician confirmed, "both looking healthy." Vivica left the clinic in a daze, her hands pressed against her belly where Peter's sons were growing. She should have felt anger. She should have felt the urge to call him, to demand he face the consequences of his accusations. But she felt only a fierce, protective love for these 2 beings who hadn't asked to be born into chaos. That night, she named them silently. Caleb and Joshua. Prophets who had endured hardship and emerged faithful. She needed that faith now. The birth was lonely. Ruth drove her to the county hospital when contractions started, dropping her off with a quick squeeze of the shoulder. "You're stronger than you think." Vivica didn't feel strong. She felt terrified and alone, gripping the bed rails as her body tore itself apart, bringing life into the world. No partner holding her hand, no family in the waiting room, just her and 2 babies fighting their way into existence. Caleb arrived first, screaming with indignation. Joshua followed minutes later, quieter, his eyes seeming to take in the fluorescent lights with solemn observation. "Twins," the exhausted nurse said, placing them both on Vivica's chest. "Congratulations, Mama." Vivica looked down at their tiny faces and felt something inside her shift permanently. These boys would never know abandonment. They would never feel unwanted. She would build them a life from nothing, and it would be enough. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and relentless forward motion. Vivica found a subsidized apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots occasionally punctuated the night. It had one bedroom, cracked linoleum, and windows that didn't close properly, but it was theirs. She returned to school, taking night classes online while the twins slept, earning her degree in social work while breastfeeding during lectures, typing papers with one hand while rocking a cradle with her foot. The boys grew. Caleb was all smiles and easy laughter, reaching for everything with chubby hands, fascinated by shapes and patterns. Joshua was more thoughtful, his gaze tracking movements, his tiny fingers clutching at fabric and holding on as if understanding that letting go meant falling. Vivica talked to them constantly, narrating her life like they could understand. "We're going to the store now. We'll walk because the bus doesn't come for an hour. It's good exercise, fresh air. See the leaves, red and gold. Beautiful things are free." She refused bitterness. Some nights, alone after the boys slept, she would feel the weight of what Peter had thrown away, but she never spoke his name to them, never poisoned their minds with her pain. Instead, she told them a story, a different story, a fairy tale. Once there was a king who loved a queen. They built a beautiful kingdom together, but a wicked wizard convinced the king that the queen had betrayed him, and the king believed the lie. So the queen had to leave the kingdom, and she was very sad. But she carried with her the most precious gifts the king had ever given her, even though he didn't know, and she raised those gifts with all the love they both should have shared. "What happened to the king?" Caleb asked when he was old enough to understand the story. The king lived in his castle alone, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. "Did he?" Joshua's voice was always softer, more measured. Vivica smoothed his hair, choosing her words carefully. "He made a choice based on fear instead of love, and fear always costs more than people realize." The boys grew into extraordinary children, despite the poverty surrounding them. Caleb excelled at anything involving numbers, solving puzzles intended for much older children, his mind working in patterns and sequences that left his teachers astonished. Joshua devoured books, writing stories in cramped handwriting on whatever paper he could find, his observations about people and their motivations eerily perceptive. Vivica worked multiple jobs, social worker by day, teaching community classes. In the evening, cleaning offices late at night while the boys did homework in break rooms. She was exhausted always, worn thin, but she never let them see her break. "Why do you work so hard, Mama?" Caleb asked once, watching her ice her swollen feet. "Because you two are worth every single tired bone in my body." "The king in the story," Joshua said quietly. "Does he ever find out about the gifts?" Vivica met her son's eyes, seeing in them a reflection of the man who'd thrown her away. "I don't know, baby. Some stories don't have endings yet." But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Peter Clark had no idea what he'd lost. And if life had any justice, he would spend the rest of his days drowning in that ignorance. The universe, however, had different plans. Plans written in genetic code, waiting in the shadows, counting down to a moment when the past and present would collide with the force of two young hearts simultaneously beginning to fail. Chapter 3. The Mansion of Echoes. Peter Clark stood in his study, staring at architectural renderings that should have excited him. Another tower, another development, another monument to achievement that felt hollow at its core. His assistant knocked softly. The contractors are here for the final approval meeting. Cancel it. Sir, they've been scheduled for weeks. Cancel it. His voice was flat, distant. Reschedule for whenever. I don't care. The assistant retreated, and Peter returned to his window, looking out over manicured grounds that resembled a cemetery more than a garden. Everything perfect, everything dead. The mansion had become a mausoleum, 32 rooms, most of them untouched, gathering dust behind closed doors. The cleaning service came weekly, moving through the space like ghosts, careful not to disturb anything in the master bedroom, especially not the reading chair by the window. It had been Vivica's chair. She'd spent mornings there with her coffee and whatever book had caught her attention, sunlight turning her skin to bronze, her expressions shifting with the words she read. Peter had never moved it, never allowed anyone to clean it. Sometimes he'd find himself standing in the doorway at dawn, half expecting to see her there, feet tucked under her, that slight smile she got when she read something beautiful. But the chair stayed empty. His sister Diane was the only person who regularly invaded his isolation. She arrived unannounced, letting herself in with the key he'd foolishly given her, and found him in the study pretending to work. "You look like death." "Good morning to you too." She sat down, uninvited, studying him with the brutal honesty only siblings possess. "When was the last time you ate a real meal, or slept for more than a few hours, or left this tomb you've built for yourself?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you." Peter's jaw tightened. "I don't want to discuss this." "Of course you don't, because discussing it would mean admitting you were wrong." Diane leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Did you ever find proof, Peter? After all these years, did you ever actually confirm she was unfaithful? The photos were circumstantial at best. You never found receipts for hotel rooms, never found love letters, never found a single concrete piece of evidence because there wasn't any to find. You don't know that. Neither do you. But you destroyed your marriage anyway." He wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat, because Diane was right. Over the years, in moments of terrible clarity, Peter had questioned everything, had hired investigators long after the divorce was final, trying to find something, anything, that would justify what he'd done. They'd found nothing. Malcolm, the man in the photos, was exactly what Vivica had claimed, a colleague, happily married with 3 children. No history of affairs, no connection to Vivica beyond professional collaboration on shelter projects. The anonymous letters had stopped after the divorce. The photographer had never been identified. Peter had traced the origin of the photos to a disposable email address that led nowhere. And slowly, over months that turned into years, a horrifying possibility had taken root. He'd been played. Someone had wanted to destroy his marriage, and he'd handed them the weapon. Lawrence, Peter had confronted his former business partner after discovering financial irregularities. "Did you send those photos?" Lawrence had smiled, cold and calculating. "Does it matter now? You're free of her. You can focus on what's important." Peter had severed all ties that day, but the damage was permanent. Vivica was gone, and he had no idea where. He'd tried finding her, hired the best investigators money could buy, but Vivica Spencer had vanished completely, leaving no trail, no forwarding address, nothing. It was as if she'd been erased from existence. The videos remained on his phone. He'd watch them late at night, whiskey burning his throat, her laughter filling the empty study. Their wedding, their honeymoon, mundane moments of her cooking breakfast, making terrible jokes, dancing in the kitchen to music only she could hear. "You're watching them again," Diane said, recognizing the hollow look in his eyes. "I can't help it." "Then do something about it. Hire better investigators. Put up billboards. Something other than slowly dying in this house. What's the point? Even if I found her, what would I say? Sorry I ruined your life based on lies. Sorry I threw you away like trash." She'd be right to spit in my face. Maybe, but at least you'd have tried. Peter said nothing. Because the truth was more pathetic. He was afraid. Afraid of confirmation that she'd moved on, found happiness, built a life that didn't include him. Afraid of seeing in her eyes the complete absence of feeling, which would be worse than hatred. So he stayed in his mansion, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing, attending meetings out of habit, making decisions that affected thousands while unable to manage his own existence. His bedroom was the worst. He'd kept everything exactly as it was. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her books remained on the nightstand. Her pillow stayed on her side of the bed, and Peter never touched it, sleeping on his side, staring across the vast, empty space that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. "You didn't lose her," Diane said, standing to leave. "That would imply it was beyond your control. You threw her away, Peter. You chose pride over trust. That's worse than loss. That's voluntary destruction." After she left, Peter walked through the mansion, really seeing it for the first time in years. The dining room where they'd never eaten meals, too formal, too cold. The living room with furniture no one sat on. The kitchen that prepared food for one person in a space designed for families. His footsteps echoed on marble floors, and he realized Diane was right. This wasn't a home. It was a monument to absence, a shrine to everything he'd destroyed. In the garage, his collection of vehicles sat unused. Sports cars, luxury sedans, a vintage motorcycle he'd bought, thinking it would make him feel young again. He couldn't remember the last time he'd driven any of them. He selected one at random, some expensive machine, and drove. No destination, just movement. The roads passed in a blur, and he found himself in neighborhoods he'd never seen, where children played in streets and families gathered on porches, where poverty and joy somehow coexisted. He stopped at a park, watching a woman push twin boys on swings. They were laughing, shrieking with delight, while the mother smiled with exhaustion and love. Peter felt something crack inside his chest. That could have been his life, should have been his life. Children, laughter, purpose beyond the accumulation of meaningless achievements. He drove home as darkness fell, returning to his mansion that blazed with lights but offered no warmth. Inside, he poured whiskey he wouldn't drink and stood at the window of his study, looking out at nothing. Tomorrow would be the same, and the next day, and the next, an endless succession of identical moments stretching toward a grave he would reach, having accomplished nothing that mattered. Peter Clark, master of the material world, stood alone in his empire of dust, and wondered how a man could be so wealthy and so bankrupt at the same time. The answer, of course, was simple. He'd gambled everything on pride and lost the only thing worth keeping. And somewhere in the world, his former wife was either flourishing or drowning, and he would never know which, because he'd forfeited the right to ask. But the universe keeps accounts that human beings don't see. And Peter Clark's debt, compounded over years with interest paid in regret, was about to come due in the form of a phone call that would shatter whatever remained of his carefully constructed numbness. Chapter 4. When Biology Becomes Destiny. The gymnasium smelled like teenage sweat and ambition. Joshua Spencer moved down the court with fluid grace, his movements economical and purposeful. Community basketball wasn't about competition for him. It was about the rhythm, the way the game forced him into the present moment. Away from the stories constantly running through his head, Caleb watched from the bleachers, simultaneously timing his brother's sprints and calculating optimal angles for three-point shots. His notebook was filled with equations and observations, transforming the game into mathematics, finding patterns in chaos. Vivica sat beside him, proud and tired, having just finished an overnight shift at the crisis center. Watching her sons had become her meditation, these two extraordinary young men who'd grown from nothing into everything. The ball arced toward Joshua. He caught it mid-stride, pivoted, and then stopped, just stopped. His hand went to his chest. His face changed. The ball dropped from his fingers, bouncing away forgotten as Joshua's knees buckled. Vivica was moving before he hit the ground, her mother's instinct faster than thought. She reached him as he collapsed, his body convulsing, his eyes rolling back. "Someone call an ambulance." Her voice cut through the sudden chaos, steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Caleb was already on his phone, his hands shaking, but his voice clear, rattling off their location and his brother's symptoms to the emergency operator. The ambulance arrived in what felt like both seconds and centuries. Paramedics swarmed Joshua, asking questions Vivica answered on autopilot, while her mind screamed denials. This wasn't happening. Her son was healthy. Her son was strong. This was a mistake, an anomaly, something explainable and fixable. The hospital emergency room was controlled pandemonium. Doctors barked orders. Machines beeped urgently. Joshua was wheeled away behind swinging doors that closed in Vivica's face, separating her from her son. And she felt a primal rage at barriers, at helplessness, at the universe for daring to threaten her child. Caleb stood beside her, silent, his mind already racing through possibilities, calculating odds he didn't want to face. "Are you his mother?" A doctor appeared, young but tired, wearing the expression medical professionals adopt when delivering bad news. "Yes. What's wrong with my son?" "We've stabilized him, but I need to run some tests." "Has he ever had chest pains? Shortness of breath? Dizzy spells?" "No, nothing. He's healthy. He's an athlete." The doctor nodded, but his eyes said he'd heard that before. "I'll have more information soon. But Mrs. Spencer, I need you to prepare yourself. His heart rhythm is severely irregular. We're looking at something significant." The tests took hours. Vivica and Caleb sat in a waiting room where time moved differently, stretching and contracting, where every opening door might bring salvation or devastation. Finally, a cardiologist appeared, older, with grey hair and eyes that had seen too much death. He sat down, which was never a good sign. "Your son has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a genetic condition where the heart muscle becomes abnormally thick, making it harder for the heart to pump blood. In Joshua's case, it's advanced. He's in acute heart failure." The words landed like physical blows. Vivica's hand found Caleb's, gripping tight. "What does that mean? Treatment? Surgery?" "It means his heart is working at a fraction of normal capacity and deteriorating rapidly. Standard treatments aren't options here because of the specific genetic markers involved. We need to look at cellular therapy, stem cell transplantation from a biological parent to essentially rebuild the damaged tissue." Vivica processed this, her medical training kicking in despite her panic. "My cells. Test mine. We will. But there's something else." The cardiologist looked at Caleb. "This condition is hereditary. Given that you're his twin, there's a very high probability you have it too." Caleb's face went pale. "I feel fine, for now, but if you have the same genetic markers, your heart is likely in the early stages of the same deterioration. We need to test you immediately." The next hours became a nightmare of needles and scans. Caleb was poked, prodded, imaged, his body scrutinized for the invisible killer hiding in his genetic code. The results confirmed everyone's fears. Both twins carried the mutation. Both were dying, just at different speeds. Vivica's test results came back after an agonizing wait. The cardiologist's face told her everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Spencer. Your cells aren't compatible. There's a chromosomal mismatch that makes you unsuitable as a donor. It's rare, but it happens. Then find another donor. There must be a registry, someone compatible. The genetic markers are too specific. They inherited this from their father. We need his cells. The DNA match has to be nearly exact for this therapy to work." The room tilted. Vivica heard the words but couldn't process their implications. "Their biological father," the cardiologist continued gently. "Is he available? Willing to be tested?" Caleb and Joshua, lying in adjacent beds in the ICU, looked at their mother with questions they'd never asked but always wondered. "We have a father." Joshua's voice was weak, confused. "You always said he was gone," Caleb added. "That he that he left before we were born. Vivica had never lied to her sons, only omitted the parts too painful to explain. And now those omissions had become a crisis. "Your father doesn't know you exist," she said quietly. "He never knew I was pregnant. We separated before I found out." "Then find him!" Joshua's monitor beeped urgently, his stress affecting his already compromised heart. "Please, Mama, I don't want to die." Those words shattered something fundamental in Vivica. Her son, asking for life from a man who'd destroyed hers. That night, after the boys finally slept under sedation, Vivica sat in the hospital chapel. Empty pews, dim lighting, the weight of an impossible choice. She'd sworn she would never contact Peter Clark again, had built a life specifically to avoid ever needing him, had raised 2 sons to be whole without a father, because fathers could be poison, could be absence, could be the thing that ruins you. But now, those sons were dying, and their cure lay in the genetics of the man who'd thrown her away like garbage. Her phone sat in her lap. His number still stored after all these years, kept not out of hope, but out of some masochistic need to remember what not to believe in. Her finger hovered over the call button. If she made this call, Peter would learn about the sons he'd never known. He would have power over their survival. He could refuse, could demand things, could insert himself into the life she'd carefully constructed without him. But if she didn't make this call, her sons would die. And all her pride, all her justified anger, all her carefully guarded independence would mean nothing if Caleb and Joshua weren't alive to benefit from it. Vivica pressed the button before she could reconsider. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. She almost hung up, almost chickened out, almost chose pride over her children's lives. Then a voice answered, unchanged by time, familiar as her own heartbeat. "Hello." Vivica's mouth went dry. Her prepared speech evaporated. All that remained was truth, raw and desperate. "Peter," she managed, "I need to tell you something about 18 years ago." Chapter 5. The Voice That Stopped Time. Peter Clark sat in his study, staring at spreadsheets that blurred into meaningless numbers when his private cell phone rang. Unknown number? He almost declined, but something made him answer. "Hello?" Silence, then breathing. Then a voice he'd never forgotten, despite trying desperately to do so. "Peter, I need to tell you something about 18 years ago." His heart stopped, actually stopped just for a moment, before slamming back to life with painful force. The spreadsheets, the walls, everything dissolved. There was only her voice. Older and tired, but unmistakably Vivica. Vivica! Her name left his mouth like a prayer and a curse combined. "I wouldn't call if there was any other option." Her voice was controlled, clinical, deliberately empty of emotion. "I need you to listen without interrupting." "Can you do that?" He couldn't speak, could only make a sound of acknowledgement. "When I left you, I was pregnant. 2 months. I didn't know at the time. I found out 3 weeks after the divorce was final." The world tilted. Peter gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, phone pressed so hard against his ear it hurt. "You have sons, twins. Their names are Caleb and Joshua. They're 17, and they're dying." Each word was a bullet. Peter's vision darkened at the edges. "They have a genetic heart condition. It came from you. Their hearts are failing, and the only treatment that can save them requires stem cells from their biological father. I need you to come to City General Hospital. I need you to be tested. I need you to help save the children you never knew existed." "I have sons." Peter's voice broke on the words. "You kept my sons from me for 17 years? 18 years, she corrected coldly. "And yes, I kept them from a man who accused me of betrayal without proof, who threw me out of his house, who chose suspicion over love. I kept them from that. You should have told me." "Why?" "So you could look at them with the same doubt you looked at me. So you could poison them with your paranoia. So they could grow up knowing their father thought their mother was a whore." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Peter wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the justifications died in his throat because she was right. He'd been cruel. He'd been wrong, and now there were consequences he'd never imagined. Are they? He couldn't finish the question. They're in ICU. One of them collapsed during a basketball game. The other has the same condition in early stages. Without treatment, they'll both be dead within months. Peter stood abruptly, his chair crashing backward. I'm coming. Right now. I'll drive. No, her voice turned sharp. You'll hire a car service. You'll arrive sober and rational. Because if you show up intoxicated or emotional and disturb my sons while they're fighting for their lives, I will have security remove you and your cells be damned. I will find another way. Vivica, do you understand? Yes. City General, main entrance. Ask for Dr. Reeves in cardiology. He's expecting you. She paused, and he heard something crack in her controlled facade. Peter, I'm not asking for us. I'm not asking for forgiveness or explanations or anything to do with what you destroyed. I'm asking for them. They're innocent in all of this. They deserve to live. I know. Do you? Because once you walk through those hospital doors, you can't unsee them. You can't pretend they don't exist. They're real, Peter. They're brilliant and kind and everything good that we might have been together. And if you help save them and then disappear back to your mansion, I will make sure they never forgive you for that abandonment either. I won't disappear. You don't get to make promises anymore. You lost that right when you called me a liar and threw me away. Her voice finally broke. Just come, just be tested. Just do this one thing right in the middle of everything you did wrong. The line went dead. Peter stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. Then he moved, grabbing his jacket, his wallet, his keys, before remembering her instruction about a driver. He called his assistant at home, waking him. I need a driver, now, City General Hospital. It's an emergency. Sir, it's nearly midnight. Now! While waiting, Peter paced, his mind reeling. Sons, twins, 17 years old. Nearly adults, and he'd missed everything. First words, first steps, first days of school, every birthday, every milestone, gone, stolen by his own stupidity, and they were dying. His children, whom he'd never held, never met, were dying from a genetic condition he'd given them. His fault twice over. First for the DNA, second for not being there to notice symptoms, to get early treatment, to do whatever fathers are supposed to do. The driver arrived. Peter climbed into the back seat of a luxury sedan, giving the address, watching the mansion recede through the rear window. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd been dying slowly in that house, and now he was rushing to a hospital to possibly die, quickly saving children who didn't know him. The city passed in a blur of lights. Peter's hands shook. He tried calling Vivica back, but she didn't answer. He typed and deleted a dozen text messages, each one sounding more pathetic than the last. Can you go faster? He asked the driver. Sir, I'm already 10 over the limit. I don't care. Go faster. They arrived at City General just after 1 in the morning. Peter burst through the main entrance, wild-eyed and disheveled, approaching the information desk. Dr. Reeves, cardiology. I was told to ask for him. The receptionist made a call. Moments later, a tired-looking doctor appeared. Mr. Clark? Yes, I'm here about my sons. Saying it out loud made it real. Dr. Reeves nodded, leading him through corridors that smelled like antiseptic and fear. I've explained the situation to Ms. Spencer. The procedure is complex. We'll need to extract bone marrow stem cells from you, culture them, and transplant them into both boys. The extraction itself is painful but relatively safe. However, there are risks, infection, anesthetic complications, and your immune system will be compromised for months afterward. I don't care about risks. They reached the ICU. Through a window, Peter saw them for the first time. 2 young men, nearly adults, lying in adjacent beds. Even unconscious, even with tubes and monitors obscuring their features, Peter recognized himself in them. The shape of their faces, the set of their shoulders. Genetic echoes impossible to deny. That's Caleb on the left, Dr. Reeves said quietly. He's the early stage. That's Joshua on the right. He's critical. Peter's legs nearly gave out. His sons, his children, real and dying and completely unknown to him. A woman stood between the beds, one hand on each boy's arm. Even from behind, even after 18 years, Peter recognized Vivica. She was thinner, worn down by time and hardship, but unmistakably herself. She turned, and their eyes met through the glass. The hatred there nearly stopped his heart a second time. Pure justified, burning hatred mixed with desperation. She hated him. She needed him. Both truths existed simultaneously, and Peter understood he would spend the rest of his life trying to bridge that impossible distance. Dr. Reeves moved toward the door, but Vivica stepped out first, blocking Peter's path. "You can look," she said coldly, "but you don't touch. You don't speak to them. They're unconscious anyway, but even if they weren't, you have no right to their attention yet." "Vivica, I'm so sorry. Don't." She held up a hand. "I don't have the capacity for your apologies right now. My sons are dying. You're here to stop that. Everything else is irrelevant. Can I at least see them closer?" She studied him with eyes that had once looked at him with love, and now saw only the man who'd destroyed her. Finally, she stepped aside. Peter entered the ICU on shaking legs. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Caleb had his mother's expressions, but his features were Peter's. Joshua looked like a younger version of Peter himself, down to the way his hair fell across his forehead. "They're beautiful," Peter whispered. "They're good," Vivica corrected. "Beautiful is superficial. They're good human beings, despite having a father who doesn't know them and a mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. They're kind and brilliant and humble, and if you help save them, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to deserve them." Peter reached out, almost touching Joshua's hand, then stopped, remembering Vivica's prohibition. "I want to know everything," he said. "What they like, what they dream about, their favorite foods, everything I missed." "You missed everything," Vivica said flatly. "Literally everything. And you don't get to download 18 years in one conversation. If they survive, if they choose to know you, then maybe you'll earn those stories. But not from me, never from me." Dr. Reeves returned with paperwork. "Mr. Clark, we need to start the testing immediately. Time is critical." Peter nodded, unable to look away from his sons. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes." As they led him away for blood work and genetic screening, Peter looked back once. Vivica had returned to her position between the beds, a warrior standing guard over her children, protecting them even from their own father. And Peter understood with terrible clarity he wasn't here as a parent. He wasn't here as someone with rights or claims. He was here as a genetic resource, a biological tool, and whether he ever became anything more would depend on 2 boys who didn't know him, and 1 woman who had every reason to make sure they never did. The drive to the hospital had taken 40 minutes, but the distance between where Peter stood now and where he needed to be might take a lifetime to cross. And even then, forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. Only one thing was certain: Peter Clark's empty years of regret had just collided with consequence, and the collision would either destroy him completely or rebuild him into something worth being. Chapter 6. The photograph that broke a fortress. Peter Clark sat in a hospital examination room at 4 in the morning, watching a technician draw the 8th vial of blood. His arms were bruised, his head pounded. His world had shattered and reformed in the space of a few hours, and he existed now in a strange state of shock, where nothing felt real except the image of those 2 boys burned into his mind. "We'll have preliminary results in a few hours," Dr. Reeves explained. "If you're a match, we can begin the extraction procedure as early as tomorrow evening. And if I'm not a match?" The doctor's silence was answer enough. Peter returned to his mansion as dawn broke, but he couldn't stay there. The empty rooms, the echoing halls, suddenly felt obscene. He'd been living in a mausoleum while his children grew up in poverty, while Vivica worked herself to exhaustion, while an entire parallel universe existed that he'd known nothing about. He called his assistant again. I need investigators, the best. I want everything on Vivica Spencer and her sons. Everything. School records, medical history, where they've lived, where they are now. Sir, I already have some preliminary information from when we searched for Miss Spencer years ago. I want more. I want everything. The files arrived by noon. Peter spread them across his desk, reading with increasing devastation. Vivica had lived in a women's shelter, had worked at a textile factory while pregnant, had given birth at a county hospital with no partner present, had somehow earned her degree while raising twins alone, had worked multiple jobs simultaneously for years. The boys' school records showed brilliance despite poverty, advanced classes, scholarship recommendations, teachers' notes praising their character, their kindness, their work ethic, and photographs. His private investigator had included recent surveillance photos from social media and public sources. Caleb at a science fair, holding a trophy, grinning with pure joy. Joshua reading at a library, his expression serious and focused. Both boys playing basketball together, their movements synchronized in a way only twins achieve. Peter's hands shook as he stared at the images. These were his sons, his children, and he'd missed everything. His phone rang. Dr. Reeves, Mr. Clark, the results are in. You're a complete match. We can proceed tomorrow evening if you're willing. I'm willing. Whatever you need. There's something you should know. The procedure carries risks for you. Your immune system will be severely compromised for months. Any infection could be serious, potentially fatal. And there's a small chance of complications during the extraction that could cause permanent damage. I don't care. You should care. You have a life to consider. Peter laughed bitterly. No, I really don't. Schedule the procedure. He tried returning to the hospital, but Vivica's orders were clear. Security had his photo, his description, instructions to keep him away from the ICU. He drove there anyway, parking across the street, watching the entrance like a stalker, hoping for a glimpse of his sons. Hours passed. He saw nothing. Night fell. He didn't leave. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, his sister, business associates wondering where he was. He ignored them all. Near midnight he finally drove home, hollow and desperate. Sleep was impossible. He paced his mansion, walking through rooms he'd ignored for years, seeing everything differently now. This house could have been filled with life, laughter, arguments over homework, toys scattered on expensive rugs, basketball hoops in the driveway, all the chaos and beauty of family. Instead, it was a tomb, and he'd built it himself. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered instantly. Mr. Clark? An unfamiliar female voice. I'm a nurse on the ICU floor. I probably shouldn't be calling, but I saw your name on Miss Spencer's emergency contact list from years ago, and I thought you should know Joshua's condition deteriorated tonight. They had to resuscitate him. He's stable now, but it was close. Peter's blood turned to ice. Is he? He's alive, but barely. Miss Spencer is with him. She hasn't left his side. And, sir, I've been a nurse for 23 years. I've seen a lot of family situations. Whatever happened between you two, those boys are innocent. They deserve every chance. I know. I'm scheduled for the extraction tomorrow. I know. I processed your paperwork. I just wanted you to understand the urgency. Joshua might not have another day if something goes wrong. Can you do something for me? Peter's voice cracked. Can you send me a photo? Of them, I need to see them. There was a long pause. I could lose my job for this. Please, another pause. Then, check your messages. The call ended. Seconds later, an image loaded on Peter's phone. Both boys, side by side in their hospital beds. Joshua unconscious, monitors surrounding him. Caleb awake, holding his brother's hand, his face etched with fear and love. Peter stared at the photo until his vision blurred. Then he broke. 18 years of suppressed emotion, of carefully maintained numbness, of building walls around the gaping wound Vivica's absence had left, all came crashing down at once. He sobbed, deep wrenching sobs that tore from his chest, echoing through the empty mansion. He'd thought he was crying for his sons, but he was crying for everything. For the life he'd destroyed, for the woman he'd thrown away, for the father he'd never become, for the years stolen by pride and paranoia. When the storm finally passed, Peter sat on the floor of his study, back against the desk, phone still clutched in his hand, staring at his sons. "I'm going to save you," he whispered to the screen. "And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." But first, he had to survive the procedure, had to get his cells into their bodies, had to bridge the biological gap before even attempting the emotional one. The next day crawled past with excruciating slowness. Peter arrived at the hospital an hour early for his procedure. They prepped him, explaining the process again, asking him to sign waivers, acknowledging the risks. He signed without reading. They took him to a surgical suite, explaining they'd anesthetize him before beginning the bone marrow extraction. It would hurt afterward, they warned. The recovery would be difficult. "I don't care," Peter repeated for what felt like the 100th time. As the anesthesia began to pull him under, his last conscious thought was a prayer to a God he'd stopped believing in years ago. "Let me live long enough to save them. Whatever happens after that is fine. Just let me save them." He woke in recovery hours later, his entire body screaming with pain. A nurse checked his vitals, smiling with professional kindness. The extraction was successful. "They're preparing to transplant now." Peter tried to speak, but his mouth was too dry. The nurse understood, bringing water, helping him drink. "My sons, the transplant for Caleb has already begun. Joshua's will start within the hour. Dr. Reeves will update you when we know more." Time became meaningless. Peter drifted in and out of consciousness, his body recovering from the assault, his mind trapped in anxious loops. Would it work? Would they survive? And if they did, would they ever want to know him? When he finally woke fully, Diane was sitting beside his bed. "You absolute idiot," she said, but her eyes were wet. "You could have died. I have sons. I know. Your assistant called me panicking because you disappeared. I got the whole story out of him." She took his hand carefully. "They're going to make it, Peter. Both transplants took. They're stable." Peter closed his eyes, overwhelmed with relief so intense it physically hurt. "And you're going to be fine too," Diane continued. "Though your doctor says your immune system is shot, you'll need to be careful for months, maybe longer." "I don't care." "Yes, you've mentioned that several times, apparently." She squeezed his hand. "Now comes the hard part. What's harder than this? Facing them, explaining yourself, trying to be a father to sons who don't know you, and a man to a woman who hates you." Peter opened his eyes, meeting his sister's gaze. "She has every right to hate me." "Yes, she does. The question is what you're going to do about it." Before Peter could answer, his hospital room door opened. Dr. Reeves entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Clark, there's been a development." Peter's heart seized. They're stable, but you need to know something happened during the procedure that Miss Spencer wasn't aware of, and I felt you deserve to understand it before anyone else does." Chapter 7. 5 Prayers in the Storm. Peter Clark sat in his hospital bed, Dr. Reeves's words hanging in the air like suspended judgment. "During the procedure," the doctor continued, "Joshua's heart stopped completely. We lost him for almost 3 minutes. The room tilted. Peter gripped the bed rails. "But we got him back," Dr. Reeves said quickly. "The transplant worked and he's stable now. However, the surgical team heard something during those critical minutes. You were still under anesthesia, but apparently you were talking. Not just talking, but saying something very specific." Peter's mouth went dry. "What did I say?" "You kept repeating, 'Take everything from me. My life, my breath, everything. Just let them live.' The nurses wrote it down because it was so unusual. You said it dozens of times, completely unconscious, while your son was dying and being brought back." Peter couldn't speak. "I'm telling you this because Ms. Spencer doesn't know yet, and I think she should. But that's your decision. Dr. Reeves paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mr. Clark, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen a lot of fathers. What you did, knowing the risks, that's not nothing. Don't let anyone tell you it's nothing. After the doctor left, Peter lay in bed, his body aching from the extraction, his mind reeling. He'd been willing to die. Apparently, his unconscious mind had been willing to trade his life for theirs. But was that enough? Could one act of sacrifice erase 18 years of absence? Over the next days, Peter tried everything to reach Vivica and the boys. Each attempt was a new form of rejection, each refusal another lesson in consequences. His first attempt was rational, calculated. He hired the best medical malpractice attorney he knew, not for litigation, but for drafting a letter explaining everything. The science, the procedure, the risks he'd taken, the sincerity of his desire to know his sons. The attorney produced 6 pages of carefully crafted language, balancing emotional appeal with legal precision. Peter read it, signed it, had it hand-delivered to Vivica at the hospital. She received it in the cafeteria. Peter's investigator reported that she'd read 3 lines, walked to the nearest trash can, and set the letter on fire with a lighter borrowed from a janitor. The staff had to put out the small blaze. Vivica had walked away without looking back. The attorney called, stunned. "That was my best work." "It wasn't good enough," Peter said flatly. His second attempt was more direct. He hired a child psychologist specializing in family reunification and the best pediatric geneticist in the state. They would go to the hospital, explain everything to Vivica rationally, professional to professional. Make her understand that the boys deserved to know their father. They made it through the lobby before security stopped them. The guards had Peter's photo and apparently a description of anyone associated with him. Vivica had been thorough. The psychologist called afterward. "Sir, I don't think you understand the depth of her anger. She's not being irrational. She's protecting her sons from what she perceives as a threat. And given your history, I can't say she's wrong. So what do I do? Give her time. Let the boys recover. Prove through patience that you're not going away, but you're also not forcing yourself where you're not wanted." But Peter had never been good at patience. His third attempt happened during a hurricane. Weather warnings had evacuated most of the city, but Peter drove to the hospital anyway, fighting winds that rocked his car, rain that turned the roads into rivers. He parked across the street and waited. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Rain hammered the windshield so hard he couldn't see. But he stayed, some part of him believing that suffering would mean something, would count for something. Near midnight he got out of the car. The hurricane winds nearly knocked him over. Rain soaked him instantly, plastering his expensive suit to his body. He stood under the ER overhang, the only shelter for blocks, and began speaking her name. Vivica. He said it to the storm, to the night, to the universe that had brought them to this. "Vivica, I'm sorry. Vivica, please. Vivica, let me try." He said it until his voice was hoarse, until he was shivering so violently his teeth chattered, until he couldn't feel his fingers or toes. An orderly found him near dawn, semi-conscious from hypothermia, still whispering her name. They brought him inside, warmed him up, tried to admit him. He refused, walking out on shaking legs, getting back in his car, sitting there watching the hospital as the storm cleared and morning broke. A nurse told Vivica what happened. She listened without expression, then said only, "He's dramatic. It changes nothing." But something flickered in her eyes just for a moment. Some tiny recognition that his suffering was real, even if it didn't matter. Peter's fourth attempt was financial. He liquidated several assets, gathering resources he'd been hoarding out of habit. $5 million transferred to the hospital's cardiac wing with specific instructions. Create a fund for families without insurance, for children who needed care but couldn't afford it. Name it after Caleb and Joshua Spencer. He included a separate check made out to Vivica for all her medical expenses. past and present, and a sum that would cover the boy's education through graduate school. The check arrived by courier. Vivica received it in her temporary housing, a small room near the hospital. She looked at the amount, looked at Peter's signature, and felt nothing. She tore the check methodically into 2 pieces, then 4, then 8, then 16. She continued until it was confetti, put the pieces in an envelope, and mailed it back to Peter's corporate office with no note, no explanation. His assistant found him later holding the pieces like sacred texts, trying to fit them back together. "She doesn't want your money," Diane observed. "Then what does she want?" "Nothing from you. That's the point. You took everything that mattered once. Now she's showing you that everything you have left means nothing." Peter's 5th attempt was the most desperate. He drove to the hospital again, but this time he didn't wait in the car. He didn't try to force entry. He simply walked into the lobby and sat down on the floor outside the ICU wing. Security approached immediately. "Sir, you can't be here. I'm not causing trouble. I'm just sitting. Ms. Spencer has made it clear." "I know what she's made clear. I'm not trying to see her. I'm not trying to see my sons. I'm just sitting here." They called their supervisor. The supervisor called hospital administration. Administration called security directors. Everyone agreed Peter wasn't technically violating any rules by sitting in a public corridor. So he stayed. Hour after hour, he sat with his back against the wall, medical files and compatibility screenings scattered around him. People passed, staring. Hospital staff began to whisper. Some looked at him with pity, others with contempt. He didn't eat, barely drank, just sat there, occasionally whispering words that were both prayer and confession. "Even if I die doing this, let me save what I should have protected." 36 hours passed. His body began shutting down from the stress, from his compromised immune system, from the extraction procedure his body was still recovering from. A nurse finally convinced him to at least drink water. He took a few sips and handed the bottle back. "You're going to die out here," she said. "We're all dying," Peter replied. "I'm just doing it where it might mean something." But his body had other ideas. Near the end of the second day, Peter collapsed, unconscious. His blood pressure catastrophic, his body surrendering. Paramedics revived him. Dr. Reeves appeared, furious and concerned in equal measure. "You're immunocompromised, you idiot. Sitting on hospital floors after major surgery? You're actively trying to kill yourself." "Will it work?" Peter asked weakly. "Will the transplant save them?" "Yes, they're responding well. Both boys are going to live." Peter closed his eyes, tears sliding down his unshaven face. "Then it doesn't matter what happens to me." Dr. Reeves studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "I'm going to tell her what you did, not to manipulate her, but because she deserves to know that while she's been protecting them from you, you've been trying to die for them." They wheeled Peter to a room, hydrating him, stabilizing him, while Dr. Reeves went to find Vivica. She was sitting between Caleb and Joshua's beds, both boys now conscious and improving, when the doctor approached. "Miss Spencer, I need to tell you something about Mr. Clark. I don't want to hear about him. Nevertheless, you need to. He's collapsed. His immune system is failing. He spent 36 hours on the ICU floor refusing food or water, and his body is shutting down. That's not my concern. Perhaps. But you should also know what he said while unconscious during the procedure, and what he's been whispering for 2 days straight." Dr. Reeves pulled out his phone, showing her the nurse's notes. "Even if I die, let me save what I should have protected." Vivica read the words. Her hands trembled slightly. "He could die," Dr. Reeves continued quietly. "The extraction already compromised him severely. This latest crisis might finish it. And Miss Spencer, I know what he did to you. I don't pretend that one sacrifice erases past harm. But your sons are going to ask questions. They're going to want to know about their father. And you're going to have to decide what story to tell them about the man who gave them life twice." Chapter 8. The Collapse That Changed Everything. Joshua. Spencer woke to the steady beep of monitors and his brother's soft snoring. They'd been moved to a shared recovery room, finally stable enough to be together, and Caleb had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, still holding his hand. The improvement had been dramatic. Joshua could breathe without fighting for air. His chest didn't hurt with every heartbeat. The fog that had clouded his mind for weeks had lifted, leaving clarity that was almost shocking. He looked at his brother, at their joined hands, and felt overwhelming gratitude. They'd survived. A nurse entered, checking vitals, smiling when she saw he was awake. "Welcome back. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm not dying anymore," she laughed. "That's the goal. Your numbers look great. Both of you are responding beautifully to the transplant. The man who donated," Joshua said carefully, "my mother won't talk about him. But he's our father, isn't he?" The nurse's expression shifted to careful neutrality. "That's something you should discuss with your mother." "I'm discussing it with you. Is he our father?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, biologically speaking. Is he here? In the hospital?" "He was. He's recovering from the extraction procedure. It took a lot out of him." Joshua processed this. Somewhere in this building was a man who was genetically his father, who'd given up bone marrow to save him and Caleb, but who their mother had never once mentioned in any positive context. When Vivica returned from the cafeteria, Joshua was sitting up, looking stronger than he had in weeks. "Baby, you should be resting." "Mom, I want to know about our father." Vivica froze, coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Caleb stirred, waking at the words. "I want to know too. There's nothing to tell." "That's a lie," Joshua said quietly, "and you've never lied to us before." "Don't start now." Vivica sat down slowly, looking between her sons, these young men who'd grown up too fast, who deserved truth even when truth was complicated. "Your father is a man named Peter Clark. We were married. We divorced before I knew I was pregnant. He made a choice based on lies instead of love, and I chose to raise you without him." "What kind of lies?" And Caleb asked. "Someone convinced him I was unfaithful." "I wasn't. But he believed the accusation without proof, divorced me and threw me out. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks later. Why didn't you tell him about us?" "Because I was protecting you from a man who chose doubt over trust. Because I didn't want you growing up wondering if your father believed you were really his. Because I loved you too much to risk his paranoia infecting your lives." Joshua absorbed this. "But he saved us. That nurse said the procedure was dangerous for him. Yes, so he risked his life for us. After never being there for you at all. One act doesn't erase 18 years of absence." "But he didn't know," Caleb interjected. "If you never told him we existed, how is he responsible for absence?" Vivica's eyes flashed. "He's responsible for destroying our marriage based on lies. He's responsible for making it impossible for me to ever trust him with the most precious things in my life." "We want to meet him," Joshua said. "No." "Mom, he's our father. He saved our lives. We deserve to at least see him." "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell us," Caleb pressed. "Tell us everything. The whole story. Not the fairy tale version about kings and queens, but the real story of what happened between you." So Vivica told them everything. The anonymous photos, the accusations, the divorce, her time in shelters and factories, the years of grinding poverty, their father's wealth and his empty mansion, the fact that he'd apparently tried to find her but failed. When she finished, both boys were quiet for a long time. Finally, Joshua spoke. "He made a terrible mistake, but so did you." Vivica's head snapped up. "Excuse me. You kept us from him, maybe for good reasons, but you kept us from him, and that was a choice you made that affected all three of us without asking what we might want. You were children." "We're not children now," Caleb said gently, "and we're asking. We want to meet our father." Vivica felt panic rising in her chest. She'd built their life specifically to avoid this moment. to never have to share them with the man who destroyed her. But then she looked at their faces, these brilliant young men she'd raised to think for themselves, to be fair, to be kind. And she realized she couldn't deny them this without betraying her own principles. "He's in recovery," she said finally. Down the hall, he collapsed from the procedure and from doing something idiotic afterward. What did he do? He sat outside the ICU for 2 days, refusing food or water, apparently trying to prove something. She said it mockingly, but the boys heard something else in her voice. "He was trying to prove he wasn't going away," Joshua said quietly, "that he'd endure anything to be close to us." That night, while Vivica was meeting with doctors to discuss discharge protocols, Joshua made a decision. He was still weak, still recovering, but he could walk short distances now. He found a sympathetic nurse and asked, "Can you tell me which room Peter Clark is in?" She shouldn't have. It violated protocol. But she'd been watching this family drama unfold, and something in Joshua's earnest face convinced her. "Room 417. But your mother—" "I know. I'll deal with that," he woke Caleb. "Come on. We're going to meet our father." They walked slowly, supporting each other. 2 young men who'd nearly died, now moving through hospital corridors on a mission of mercy and curiosity. Room 417 was dimly lit. Inside, Peter Clark lay sleeping, looking older and more worn than they'd expected. Monitors beeped steadily. His face was gaunt, his breathing shallow. They entered quietly. Peter was awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in thoughts they couldn't guess. He turned his head, saw them, and his entire being seemed to shatter and reconstruct simultaneously. For a long moment no one spoke. Father and sons looked at each other for the first time while conscious, seeing themselves reflected in each other's features. The undeniable proof of biology. "You're real," Peter whispered, his voice breaking. "We're real," Joshua confirmed. "We're your sons. I'm Joshua. This is Caleb." "I know." Peter's eyes filled with tears. "I've memorized every detail from the photos. But seeing you awake, talking, alive—" "Why did you do it?" Caleb asked. "The procedure was dangerous. You didn't have to risk yourself." "Yes, I did." Peter struggled to sit up, wincing. "Because the moment I heard you existed, you were my sons. Everything else was just noise, even though you never knew us." Joshua pressed. "Especially because I never knew you. I missed everything, every moment of your lives. That's already the greatest loss imaginable. If I could give you more life, more time, more future, why wouldn't I risk everything for that?" The boys exchanged glances, communicating in that twin language that needs no words. "Our mother says you destroyed her," Caleb said carefully. "That you accused her of betrayal without proof." Peter's face crumpled. "I did. I was wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. I chose pride over trust, suspicion over love. And I've been paying for it every day since." "She also says you tried to find her afterward, for years. I hired investigators. I wrote letters that were never delivered. His voice broke. "I destroyed the best thing in my life, and by the time I realized it, she'd vanished, taking you with her. And I didn't even know you existed to miss you." Joshua moved closer to the bed, studying his father's face. "The nurse told us something. She said during the procedure, when my heart stopped, you were unconscious, but you were talking, saying you'd give your life for us." Peter closed his eyes. "I don't remember that. Do you remember thinking it? Every second since I learned you existed. I would die for you, both of you, without hesitation. That's what fathers do." "That's what good fathers do," Caleb corrected gently. "And we don't know if you're a good father yet. We just know you're willing to die for us, which is something. But living for us might be harder. I want to try. I know I have no right to ask. I know I'm 18 years too late. But if you'll let me, I want to know you, not as some genetic donor, as your father." The boys looked at each other again, that silent twin communication flowing between them. Then Joshua did something that made Peter's breath catch. He reached out and took his father's hand. "We forgive you," Joshua said quietly. "For the mistake you made with Mom, for the years we didn't know you, for all of it. We forgive you." Caleb moved to the other side of the bed, taking Peter's other hand. "We're not angry. We're just glad you're here now, that we get to know you before it's too late." Peter couldn't speak, could only grip their hands like lifelines, while tears streamed down his face, his body shaking with sobs of relief and grief and overwhelming gratitude. The door opened. Vivica stood there, having come looking for her sons, and now frozen at the sight before her, her boys holding their father's hands. The three of them connected in a circle she'd specifically designed her life to prevent. She should have been angry, should have pulled them away, reasserted her boundaries, protected herself and them from the man who destroyed her. But what she saw in that hospital room wasn't a threat. It was three people beginning to heal wounds they'd all carried in different ways. Joshua looked up, seeing his mother. "Mom, come here, please." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Please," Caleb added. "This can't heal unless you're part of it too." Peter's eyes met Vivica's across the room. In them she saw everything: regret, hope, fear, love that had never actually died despite being buried under years of pain. And she realized Dr. Reeves was right. Her sons would ask questions. They would want to know about their father, and the story she told them would shape their understanding of love, forgiveness, and second chances. She could make Peter the villain forever, or she could take the hardest, bravest step imaginable. Vivica walked slowly into the room, her hands shaking. Approaching the bed where her sons held their father's hands, she didn't take Peter's hand. Couldn't go that far yet, but she stood there, completing the circle in spirit if not in touch, and said the words that would change everything. "He saved you. Whatever else happened, he saved you. And for that I'm grateful. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was the beginning of possibility, and sometimes that's all healing requires." Chapter 9. The Price of Second Chances. The recovery was slow for everyone. Peter's immune system had been devastated by the extraction procedure and his subsequent collapse. He spent 2 more weeks in the hospital, fighting off infections that would have been minor before, but now threatened his compromised body. Caleb and Joshua improved rapidly. Their young bodies accepted the stem cells like gifts, their hearts rebuilding themselves cell by cell. Within days, they were walking the corridors. Within a week, they were arguing about basketball statistics and debating which books were worth reading. And Vivica recognized them again, her sons returning from the edge of death with personalities intact. Peter heard them through his door sometimes, their laughter, their voices, and felt a longing so intense it physically hurt. But he didn't push, didn't demand visits or force his presence. He'd learned finally that some things couldn't be taken, only given. The boys came to him instead. Daily visits that started tentatively and grew longer each time. They'd sit in his room, asking questions, sharing stories, building connections from nothing. "What do you do?" Caleb asked during one visit. "I develop properties. Buildings, commercial spaces." Peter paused, realizing how hollow it sounded. "It's meaningless, honestly. I've spent my life building structures while ignoring the foundation of everything important." "That's dramatic," Joshua observed, but not unkindly. "It's accurate. You two, your mother, you built something real despite having nothing. I had everything and built nothing worth remembering." "You built that mansion," Caleb pointed out. "Mom told us about it. A mansion full of empty rooms is just an expensive grave. You want to know the truth? I haven't touched most of those rooms in years. I live in maybe 5 rooms of a 32-room house. The rest is just space, wasted space." "Why keep it then?" Joshua asked. "Because selling it would require admitting I built the wrong life. And I'm a coward about facing truths." The boys appreciated his honesty, even when it was harsh. They were old enough to understand complexity, to recognize that people weren't heroes or villains, but combinations of choices and consequences. Vivica heard about these visits from the nurses. She didn't stop them, but she didn't participate either. She'd watch from the hallway sometimes, seeing her sons with their father, watching them form connections she'd specifically prevented. It should have felt like betrayal, but it felt more like inevitability, like a force of nature she'd been trying to hold back with will alone. One afternoon, her sister visited, and Helena had been mostly absent during the crisis, dealing with her own health problems. But she came now, looking frail and frightened. "I need to tell you something," Helena said, her voice shaking. "Something I should have told you 18 years ago." Vivica's stomach tightened. "What? After your divorce, letters came for you. Lots of them. From Peter. They were addressed to your old apartment, the place you'd lived before moving into his mansion. The landlord was forwarding your mail to me, and I—" Helena pulled out a bundle of envelopes, yellowed with age, bound with a rubber band that had mostly disintegrated. "I intercepted them. I read them, and I destroyed them." Vivica took the bundle with trembling hands. The return address was Peter's corporate office. The postmark spanned 2 years after their divorce. "Why?" "Because I thought he was manipulating you. Because I'd seen you broken after the divorce, and I thought I was protecting you from more pain. Because I believed you were better off without him, and that those letters were just attempts to control you from a distance. You had no right. I know, and I've carried that guilt for 18 years. But now, seeing what's happened, seeing your sons with their father, I realized my interference may have caused this whole situation. If you'd gotten those letters, if you'd known he was trying to find you, maybe you would have told him about the pregnancy. Maybe nothing," Vivica interrupted, her voice cold. "Maybe I still would have kept my sons away from a man who chose suspicion over trust. Or maybe we would have worked it out. We'll never know because you decided to play God with my life." "I'm dying," Helena said quietly. "Cancer, stage 4. I have maybe 3 months, and I couldn't go to my grave carrying this secret." Vivica looked at her aunt, this woman who'd been her only family after her parents died, who'd taken her in as a teenager, who'd supported her through so much, and who'd committed this one unforgivable betrayal. "Get out. Vivica. Get out of my sight. Take your guilt and your cancer and your 3 months, and get away from me and my sons." Helena left, crying, and Vivica was alone with the letters. She opened them one by one, reading words written 18 years ago by a man she'd thought was simply cruel. But these letters told a different story. The first was formal, legalistic, clearly written by an attorney. But Peter had added a handwritten note at the bottom. "I was wrong. Please let me explain." The second was longer, more personal. He'd hired investigators who found no evidence of infidelity. The photos had been explained. Malcolm was exactly who Vivica had claimed. The anonymous letters had stopped after the divorce, suggesting they'd been sent specifically to destroy the marriage, not expose any truth. The third letter was desperate. "I've been trying to find you. No one knows where you went. Please, if you get this, just respond. Even if it's to tell me you never want to see me again. I need to know you're safe." They continued like that, 63 letters spanning 2 years, each one more raw than the last. Peter explaining everything he'd discovered, apologizing, begging for a chance to make amends, admitting he'd destroyed the best thing in his life. The final letter was the most devastating. "I'm going to stop writing now. Not because I don't care, but because these letters are clearly never reaching you, and I'm starting to understand that maybe they're not meant to. Maybe you've moved on, built a new life, and my attempts to reach you are just another form of harassment. I want you to be happy, Vivica, even if that happiness doesn't include me. Especially if it doesn't include me, because I don't deserve you anyway. I'll stop looking. I'll stop writing. I'll let you go. But I'll never stop regretting what I destroyed. I'll carry that until the day I die." Vivica sat holding the letters, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling. Peter hadn't simply moved on. He'd spent 2 years trying to fix what he'd broken, And she'd never known because her aunt had decided Vivica's life for her. She wanted to be angry at Peter still, wanted to maintain her righteous fury. But these letters complicated everything. That evening, she did something she hadn't done in 18 years. She walked to Peter's hospital room and entered without the boys as buffers. He was sitting up, reading something on a tablet, and looked up when she entered. His expression shifted through shock, hope, and fear in rapid succession. "Vivica," she held up the letters. "Did you write these?" His eyes widened. "Where did you get those? I thought they were lost, or you'd destroyed them, or my aunt intercepted them, hid them from me. She confessed today." Peter's face went through several emotions before landing on devastated understanding. "You never got them. All those years I thought you'd read them and chose silence, but you never even knew." "No, I never knew." She moved closer, still holding the letters like evidence. "These don't erase what you did, I know, but they change the story. You weren't just cruel and moving on. You were trying to fix it. I was trying to undo the worst mistake of my life. But I failed." Vivica sat down, exhausted suddenly. "Our sons asked me something today. They asked if I could ever forgive you, and I didn't have an answer. You don't owe me forgiveness. I know. That's not why I can't answer. I can't answer because I don't know what forgiveness looks like after this much time, this much pain. I don't know if it's even possible." They sat in silence, 18 years of missed communication filling the space between them. "The boys want to know you," Vivica finally said. "They've made that clear, and I won't stand in their way. But Peter, if you hurt them, if you disappoint them, if you make promises you don't keep, I won't. I'd rather die than hurt them." "You almost did die. The doctors told me about your condition. Your immune system may never fully recover. You sacrificed your health for them." "It wasn't a sacrifice. It was the least I could do after missing 18 years. Vivica studied him, this man she'd loved and hated, who destroyed her and now saved their sons. He looked older, worn, diminished from the proud figure who'd thrown her out of his mansion. But there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Humility, understanding, the kind of wisdom that only comes from losing everything. "They forgave you," she said quietly. "Caleb and Joshua, they forgave you without hesitation. And I envy them that capacity because I don't have it yet. I don't expect, let me finish." She took a breath. "But I'm willing to try. Not for you, not even for me, for them. Because they deserve a father, and you've proven you're willing to be one. So I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm saying I'm open to the possibility of someday forgiving you. And that's the best I can offer right now." Peter's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than I deserve?" "Yes, it is." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "The mansion you described, all those empty rooms, that's not a home. That's just a building. If you really want to be their father, you need to understand the difference." After she left, Peter sat alone with those words, understanding their weight. He'd spent 18 years building monuments to his own emptiness. Now he had a chance to build something real. But first, he had to survive. The doctors were increasingly concerned about his recovery. Infections kept developing despite aggressive antibiotics. His body, already compromised by the extraction, was struggling to heal. One night his condition deteriorated rapidly. Fever spiked. Blood pressure dropped. Alarms brought nurses running. Dr. Reeves worked to stabilize him, but the prognosis was grim. "Mr. Clark's immune system is essentially non-existent right now. Any infection could be fatal. We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare for the possibility that he may not recover." The news reached Vivica and the boys in their room. Caleb's face went white. Joshua's eyes filled with immediate tears. "We just found him," Joshua whispered. "We can't lose him already." Vivica felt something crack in her chest. Despite everything, despite all her justified anger, she didn't want Peter to die. And more importantly, her sons needed him to live. She made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked to Peter's room in the ICU, past the machines and monitors, and sat beside his bed. He was unconscious, feverish, fighting battles his compromised body couldn't win. She took his hand, the first time she'd touched him intentionally in 18 years, and spoke quietly. "You don't get to die, Peter Clark. You owe us 18 years, and you're not escaping that debt by giving up now. Our sons need you, and apparently, despite my better judgment, I'm not ready to be the woman who let their father die before they really knew him." Whether he heard her or not, she couldn't know, but she stayed there, holding his hand, keeping vigil the way wives do, the way she'd once promised to do forever before everything shattered. And somewhere in his fever dreams, Peter heard her voice, felt her touch, and found a reason to fight that his damaged body could cling to. Chapter 10. Welcome Home. Joshua woke before dawn to find Caleb already awake, staring at the ceiling with the kind of expression that meant his mind was working through complex problems. "You're thinking about him," Joshua said. "Aren't you?" "Constantly. It's weird having a father suddenly. Like someone handed us a piece we didn't know was missing and said, 'Here, this was always yours.'" They'd been discharged but stayed in temporary housing near the hospital, waiting for Peter's recovery. The doctors had said his latest crisis had stabilized, but his immune system remained catastrophically compromised. "Mom's been different," Caleb observed, "softer around the edges when his name comes up. 18 years of anger is hard to maintain, when the person you're angry at almost dies saving your children." A nurse had come to them the previous evening with information that felt significant. She'd done it quietly, aware she was probably violating protocols, but believing some truths needed to be told. "Your father, during the surgery when your heart stopped," she'd said to Joshua, "he was unconscious but talking. The entire surgical team heard it. He kept saying he was ready to give his life for you, over and over. 'Take everything from me, just let them live.'" The words had stayed with both boys, reshaping their understanding of this stranger who was their father. Now, as dawn broke, they made a decision together, the way twins often do, without needing to discuss it extensively, just knowing. "We should see him," Joshua said. "Now, right now." They dressed and walked to the hospital, arriving just as the ICU visiting hours began. Peter's room was dim, quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors. He was awake, staring at nothing, looking more fragile than they'd yet seen him. "Dad?" Joshua said the word for the first time, testing its weight. Peter's head turned sharply. His eyes widened. "You called me?" "Dad," Caleb confirmed, moving to the other side of the bed. "That's what you are. We decided it's time to start acting like it." Peter couldn't speak, could only look between them with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "The nurse told us something," Joshua continued, sitting on the edge of the bed, "about what you said during the surgery, that you were ready to die for us." "I don't remember that. Do you remember feeling it?" "Every second since learning you existed." Caleb took his father's hand. "That's what convinced us. Not the procedure itself, though that mattered, but the fact that unconscious, barely alive yourself, your only thought was protecting us. That's not manipulation or performance. That's just who you are." "I want to be worthy of you," Peter said, his voice breaking. "Both of you? I know I've missed everything. No, I can never get those years back. But if you'll let me, I want to be your father for whatever time I have left." "Here's the thing," Joshua said, taking Peter's other hand. "You already are our father. Biology made that true the day we were born. Now we're just choosing to acknowledge it. But Dad, you need to understand something. Anything. Mom is part of this. You can't be our father without dealing with what happened between you. We won't let you be separate entities in our lives. You have to fix what you broke with her, or this won't work." Peter's face showed the weight of that understanding. "She may never forgive me. Maybe not. But you have to try. Not with grand gestures or money or dramatic suffering. With honesty, with patience, with proving that you understand what you did and why it was unforgivable, and doing the work anyway." A voice from the Doorway made them all turn. They're very wise, for people who nearly died a month ago. Vivica stood there, holding coffee cups, looking tired but present in a way she hadn't been before. "Mom," Caleb said, "we were just telling Dad." "I heard." She moved into the room, distributing coffee to her sons, conspicuously not bringing any for Peter. "And they're right. If you want to be in their lives, we need to figure out what that means. All of us, together." "I'll do whatever you need," Peter said immediately. "First, you need to stop almost dying. The doctors say you're stable but not out of danger." She finally looked directly at him. "You're not allowed to save them and then abandon them by dying. That's not how this works. I'm trying to recover." "Try harder." Her voice was sharp, but contained something else underneath. Concern, maybe, or the remnants of feelings she'd buried for 18 years. She pulled something from her bag. The bundle of letters, now worn from multiple readings. "These changed things," she said quietly. "Not everything, but things. They show me you weren't just cruel. You were wrong, and you knew it, and you tried to fix it. That matters. I spent 2 years trying to find you. I know. And I spent 18 years building a life that specifically excluded you. We were both operating with incomplete information, making choices that seemed right at the time, but created this impossible situation." Peter sat up carefully, wincing from his still healing body. "I destroyed us based on lies and pride. That's on me. But I need you to know something, Vivica. I never stopped loving you, never moved on, never tried to replace what we had. I've been living in that mansion like a ghost for 18 years, punishing myself for throwing away the only real thing I ever had." "That's not healthy, Peter." "No, it's not. But it's true. And now, having met our sons, seeing what you built from nothing while I built nothing from everything, I understand how completely I failed. Not just as your husband, as a human being." Vivica sat down, her defenses visibly cracking. "I can't forget what you did. I can't just erase the accusation, the divorce, being thrown out, giving birth alone, raising them in poverty while you lived in luxury. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm not that man anymore, that I learned finally what actually matters." The boys watched their parents. These two people who'd created them and then destroyed each other, now circling around the possibility of healing. "What do you want?" Vivica finally asked. "From all this?" "From me, from them, from whatever comes next." Peter looked at his sons, then back at Vivica, and his answer came without hesitation. "I want to know them. Every detail, every interest, every dream. I want to be at their graduations and their weddings and every moment in between. I want to make up for 18 years of absence by being present for everything remaining." And Vivica, his voice dropped, "I want another chance with you. Not now, not rushed, but eventually. I want to prove I can choose trust over doubt, love over pride, us over my own paranoia." "That's asking a lot." "I know. And if the answer is no, I'll accept it. But I had to be honest about what I want, even if I don't deserve it." Vivica looked at her sons, these young men she'd raised alone, who were now looking at her with expressions that said, "Give him a chance. Let us try being a family." She remembered the fairy tale she'd told them for years, about the king who lost the queen and never knew about the precious gifts she carried. How she'd always wondered what would happen if the king discovered the truth. Now she knew. The king would be broken and desperate and willing to do anything to fix what he'd destroyed. The question was whether the queen had the strength to risk being broken again. "Here's what's going to happen," Vivica said, her voice steady. "You're going to recover fully. No more dramatic gestures that threaten your health. You're going to get strong enough to leave this hospital, and then we're going to sit down, all 4 of us, and figure out what family looks like for us. Not the family we should have been, not the family I built without you. A new family that accounts for all the damage and tries anyway. And us?" Peter asked carefully. "You and me? You don't get us back immediately. That's not how trust works. But I'm willing to see if the man who wrote those letters, who risked his life for his sons, who's been humbled by consequence, if that man is someone I could eventually trust again." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was possibility, and that was more than Peter had dreamed of. The boys moved closer, bringing their parents together, creating a physical circle that represented the emotional one they were trying to build. Caleb placed his hand on top of his parents' joined hands. "We forgive you, Dad, completely. Whatever you did 18 years ago, you've paid for it. And what you did for us, that's who you really are." Joshua added his hand to the pile. "We're not angry. We're not hurt. We just want to know you. We want time with you before it's too late." Peter gripped his son's hands, tears streaming freely now. "I love you both. I've loved you since the moment I learned you existed, and I'll love you until my last breath." Vivica felt something break inside her, not breaking apart, but breaking open. 18 years of carefully maintained walls, crumbling under the weight of watching her children connect with their father, under the evidence that people could change, under the slim hope that some mistakes weren't forever. She didn't pull away when Peter's hand tightened around hers, didn't flinch when his thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that was pure memory, something he used to do when they were happy, when life was simple, when love felt indestructible. "I can't promise I'll get there," she said quietly. "I can't promise I'll ever fully forgive or forget. But Peter, I can promise I'll try for them, and maybe eventually for us." Peter looked at her with eyes that held 18 years of regret and a lifetime of hope. "That's all I'm asking. Just a chance to prove I'm not the man who destroyed us. That I'm the man who'll spend every remaining day trying to rebuild what I broke." Joshua, always the writer, always seeing patterns in human stories, spoke softly. "You know what the best part of all this is? We almost died, all three of us in different ways. You from the procedure, us from our hearts failing, and we all survived. That feels like the universe saying we deserve this second chance." "The universe has a terrible sense of humor," Vivica said, but she was almost smiling. "Or perfect timing," Caleb countered. "We couldn't have met Dad before now. We were too young. You were too hurt. He hadn't learned what he needed to learn. It took 18 years and near death to get us all to this moment where healing was even possible." Peter nodded slowly. "Your son is right. I wasn't ready to be your father before this. I hadn't earned the right, but I'm ready now. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm ready." "Then get better," Vivica ordered, her voice taking on that mother tone that brooked no argument. "Stop almost dying. Start actually living, because our sons need you, and I'm not explaining to them why their father saved them and then gave up on himself." "I won't give up. I promise." As the sun rose fully, lighting the hospital room with golden warmth, the four of them sat connected, hands joined, representing not what was, but what might be. A family fractured by pride and lies, now choosing to rebuild on the foundation of humility and truth. Peter looked at the three people who were his entire world and whispered the words Vivica had said to him 18 years ago, before everything shattered. "Welcome home." Vivica's breath caught. Those were the words she'd said the day they got married, carrying him over the threshold of their first apartment. The words that had meant "you're safe, you're loved, you belong." She'd taken that home away from him. He'd destroyed the foundation it was built on. And now, impossibly, they were both choosing to believe home could be rebuilt. "Welcome home," she whispered back. And this time it meant we're starting over, trying again, choosing hope over hurt. Caleb and Joshua looked at their parents, seeing in them both the pain of the past and the possibility of the future, and understood they were witnessing something rare. Love given a second chance after being completely destroyed. "Welcome home, Dad," they said together, and Peter Clark, who'd spent 18 years in a mansion that was really a tomb, finally understood what home actually meant. Not walls or rooms or property, but these three people, these second chances, this fragile new beginning that would require more courage than he'd ever needed before. The family that should have been was gone forever. But the family that might be was just beginning. And sometimes the second story is better than the first. Not because it's perfect, but because it's built by people who understand how precious and fragile love actually is, and who choose it anyway.